Back for session 4 with Karl Binger of Paris Natural Farms. And I want to speculate the future. But before I want to do that, the idea of the farm from a homestead to a market garden has changed. In the last episode, we talked about what could be on the horizon as far as new infrastructure and perhaps some people out to the farm. I'm going to ask you at the end of this one what the ultimate goal is now. But before we do that, how has that changed from going from a homesteader to a market gardener to a market gardener to a seasoned market gardener? Because there's such a vast difference between even year 2 and year 3.
It's really all about, as I think I said in the first episode, facing the new problems in this new level, and going back and refining. And so like year 3, we've got, year 2, we struggled, especially when we brought on the bakery, succession, like always, every week being able to have the same produce, right? Like when you have people that are expecting it, and then we're not able to provide all of a sudden 1 or 2 weeks because we screwed up a succession crop. Those things are just like, they're heart wrenching on you because it's like, man, I could have done that, and you can't all of a sudden in 2 weeks make a crop grow. And so those things, the hard and core principles, I feel are locked in. They just need to be refined, and those things are, like I said, the succession crops, getting on this routine, getting the workers all in a cadence, and having some sort of way to organize tasks and to divvy out work and to prioritize. And keeping everything clean, and just a lot of those foundational pieces I feel are in place. And so moving into year 3 now, it's just going to be refining all of that and continuing to build on and focusing on this year's upcoming challenges.
You know what works at this point and what doesn't. One thing I'm interested to see is the bay, at least the gutter connect, and I know some of the stuff that we're going to do in the Gothic, there's going to be a lot more tomatoes. Which means a lot more pruning, which we've struggled with in the past. For anybody who wants to see the pruning aspect, we did a 4 series on YouTube about that. There's almost going to be a full-time tomato pruner at the property at some point, whether that's a shift in delegation or bringing on somebody new. We're 2 or 3 months away from that, and that's going to happen much faster than it's not.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of a funny story with this, actually. With farming, it has Jeff Gibson from Gibson Garden says everything's always against you, right? In farming, like, if the mice aren't eating your seeds that you just planted in your tray, then the insects are after you, or the Mother Nature's after you, or the opossums are out there after your chicken. Something's always wants what you have, right? And so last year, I hired on a young homeschooler. His name is Gage, and he was literally, because we had planted, I can't remember how many tomato plants we did, like 700 tomato plants last year.
I didn't know where this was going, but I remember now, so I'm looking.
Yeah. And he was going to be our dedicated prune. He was going to just work on tomatoes because we had that 40 by 64 gutter connect, and then we had 300-400 plants outside as well.
And this was all about the time we shot that series, and you saw the difference in tomatoes and how much more efficient it was. So, yeah.
Yep. And so we have 2 different types of techniques of trellising. We've got the lower and lean in the gutter connect, and then outside we just had the makeshift trellis system with a string that doesn't move, right? And so I brought him on, and his first day after we taught him how to prune, he realized he was allergic to tomato plants, and he broke out in hives. I'm not kidding you. And I just thought, I literally laughed. I couldn't even get mad. I'm just like, that is so typical of farming. Like, you just cannot, anticipate. You can't make this stuff up. Fortunately, Diane, after that, you were shooting the videos, and you taught her quite well. And so she actually she took a liking to it too.
Oh, they look great. It's very, I always found tomato pruning very soothing. Like you can totally shut your mind off and just do this menial task. I find it very refreshing. So I'm glad she liked it.
Yeah. Yep. And it's just, staying on top of it, of course, is tough, but yeah. So anyways, back to the question is, we will definitely have to have that this year because of, all the more space that we have now to grow and to learn from the previous years. So I'm hoping that our yield, more than anything, I hope our yields are improving, because last year we had, 700-800 plants, and we should have done a lot more off our yield, and we didn't. And that's just, elements.
Maintenance situation. It's one of those things where how many pounds is this plant going to yield in the year? But nobody ever asks how many minutes a week does this plant require in maintenance. And it should be about 2 to 4 minutes, but hopefully 2 after a little practice. But 2 minutes times a couple hundred plants, a lot of minutes, a lot of payroll.
Yeah, and people, when they start, they have different ways to measure crop value. Like Curtis Stone has I can't remember what he calls his, but everything has a value basically to choose what crops you want to choose to grow. Rather, like how much can you sell them for, how much maintenance you got to do, how much work. And I'm starting to realize almost every crop has about the same value because tomatoes, they look like they're an easy harvest but you're spending little amounts of time every week, every day, and then you're getting big yields every week. Right. Whereas like peas, you feel like they're more labor intensive because they grow up and all of a sudden now you've got to pick them all. Right. It's very tedious and you spend hours picking peas. But in the long run, you're still probably spending as much time per pound. It's all subjective. Ultimately, is what I'm saying. Like because you're out there. It's just the tomatoes make it look like it's drawn out. The time is because you're not spending hours upon hours each day. It's more of just minutes throughout the week.
Oh, I mean, for us here in North Texas, especially undercover, we can start our tomatoes in January inside. We can move them into protected culture in late February.
Yep.
By the end of March, we're pulling first fruit off.
Yep.
And that is going to last until this year. We didn't get our first frost until January, and you could have still been pulling fruit off in December.
Yep.
It's a very, very long harvest. And sometimes it even, the harvest season outlasts the yield that a vine is going to do by the time it reaches the end of it. Because I always felt like after about 60 foot, a vine loses its rigor and needs to be changed out. So you can actually do 2 succession plantings of tomatoes per year if you time it right.
Yep. If you got, then that's something that we're trying to work on this year too. Once we get our growing room set up, the succession crops for like tomatoes and those in the summertime, we need to be starting those in July. And so no plant in July wants to sit in a greenhouse and try to germinate and, be healthy because it's so hot in there, And so if we could have a climate controlled room, which is what we're working on, then we can actually start those plants out, in July to get our fall, a healthy fall succession tomato crop. And that's for everything too, for cucumbers. But so that's something that's definitely we're going to try to do this year and be more successful at.
Talk to me a little bit about a lot of homesteaders, a lot of beginning farmers are just enthralled with heirloom varieties. And now that you've done it and now that it's undercover, pretty much just said, the way to go is these indeterminate greenhouse varieties. You still want to have a few here and there, but you're not riding the business on the back of heirlooms.
Yeah. So I was kind of a ideologist almost in that, I'd say last year, like I just wanted all heirlooms and we bought, I think 11 varieties of heirloom and one hybrid, thinking that, because that's all we heard the first year was like, everybody was like, hey, are these heirlooms? And my response was no. And so I just assumed like, oh, the market tells me that we need to be doing all heirloom. Plus it's just what everybody wants. You want to grow an heirloom and at least that's what I thought. And I think it's fine for a home gardener, homesteader, but
it's how I feel about aquaponics. It's fantastic for yourself. It's real hard to do at scale.
It is. And you have to charge a premium for them because they do not conform to the ways of standard growing, right? And so they'll those plants sometimes will take off one way and not they don't have a uniformity, and their plant the fruit isn't uniform, and there's just the yield's not there. There's just so many non-standard things about the heirlooms which makes them unique. But it's hard to pull a good profit off them when you can get like a hybrid, and there should be, I think for me, I'm going to take a moment here to chat about this because people think hybrid is GMO. And that was, even for me, my first year, I was under that same thing, like, oh, I can't do a hybrid, and therefore I need to do heirlooms because that's more organic, it's more natural. And, all of a sudden you realize like hybridity is nothing more than 2 heirlooms, for example, maybe cross-pollinating, making a baby, right? And that's
over a long time.
Yeah. And so you're taking these characteristics you're taking all the good things about these 2 of different varieties of plants, and you're making a new variety. And so that was something that I just didn't understand. That first year was all about not processing that, thinking hybrid was bad, And I wanted everything to be open pollinated. I wanted all these heirlooms. And so it was a tough lesson because we banked last year all our plant sales on that, and also on all our crops, and our yield was just so poor. You know, we had some beautiful heirloom tomatoes here and there, but it wasn't worth it. And so this year we're going to do just the opposite. We're probably going to have 1 or 2 heirlooms, and the rest all just hybrids. Like, you know, again, if you're just starting out, stick to what grows great. You know, find those varieties that are easy, because you're going to be cutting your teeth on so many things. Don't cut it on learning a new variety. Like, stick with what grows well. What what are some home run varieties?
We've talked before about mass market appeal, and with the way everything is, number one, everybody's time is so pressed. Number two, we are in a part of our society where a lot of people don't cook, don't have the skill set. They like the recipe on the back of the box at the store. They don't have family recipes anymore. And even if they did have family recipes, they're not incorporating those type of vegetables. So it's very foreign, like a misshapen tomato, no matter what it tastes like. Best example I can give you. I was at this market, and the first year I was at, I grew those purple cosmos carrots. They're purple on the outside, orange in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I grew those right next to Napoli's, had the same harvest, pretty much pound for pound, took them to market. We sold out the Napoli's, and we took almost all of the purple cosmos home. Mm-hmm. Now, didn't follow my own advice. I didn't listen to the market. I didn't ask people what they wanted. I did what I thought was going to be great. And I do this long-term carrot crop that took up a lot of space that I could have used for more Napoli's or whatever the case may be. People didn't know how to cook that particular type of carrot. They didn't know what is this? Mm-hmm. It's a carrot. It's a purple carrot. Ugh. And just, you could see their faces.
Right. Something new.
It wasn't for mass market.
Yep.
Now, had I grown that for somebody specifically, I could have grew a few plants, or I could have had a little spot, and I could have took care of that 1 or 2 people that knew what to do with it, would have been more adventurous. We are already dealing with a subsect of society that even bothers to get up and come and visit us at the market. Mm-hmm. But to further push them away by having varieties that they're not used to, or they don't know what to do with it. So just something to think about.
Right. It is. And I think that there's a value, like if I were to put a percentage, like maybe a 10%, like if you have like a niche for like 10%, like Gibson's, they always do something unique every year. Like they'll try something and it'll sell. And just by dabbling in it or doing that 10%, or, that might be something that, and I think about like the big soda vendors, they probably do the same thing. They'll put out a new product just as a marketing, hey, let's just experiment with this. And if it takes off, well, then they'll add it to their product line. If not, it's just a seasonal thing.
It's a small beta test.
Yeah, it's a test, and you can just, hey, you learn something, and maybe you want to grow it for your personal or something. So I wouldn't say, I don't want to discourage anybody from not doing that, but yeah, you don't want to go to the market with a niche. Well, that sounds bad in itself, because you definitely can do that, but know your market and know what you're trying to do, and try not to, you can't just go out there and rock the boat with, something like Never Sink Farm. He brought this up. He's like, I wanted to sell collard greens, but he's up in New York. He says they don't do collard greens. They do. I can't remember what he said, but we'll just say kale. Like that's their. I think that's actually what it was. He's like, so he was trying to force collard greens on his community, and they don't do collard greens there. They do kale.
I think it's an observation worth noting that throughout this whole last 4 episodes, you've touched a little bit about different people in the industry that either have a book out or a course out or have a following to some degree. I like the depth in which you did your research going into this and continue to research. Yeah. Not really talk about, but just it's an observation I've noticed that it's not only your own personal experience, it's not only talking to your market companions, but it's also what are they doing over here? Yeah. What's somebody else doing? It's just a little side note there.
Perspective. That's honestly, the more perspective you can get, especially when you're first starting off and you're just an open book. I mean, you got to fill those pages with something, and otherwise you're filling it with only your own, And there's a lot of tendency to do that, especially in the male gene. We're very prideful, and we just want to. I'm going to do it my way, and it's hard and set, and fast, And if you don't have the humbleness to go out and to be perspective and say, I don't know what I'm doing.
And at the same time, I want to caution against filling the bucket with dirty water.
Yeah,
I fundamentally disagree and have a hard time with solely getting your information from online forums, no matter what the case may be, where beginning farmers are talking to other beginning farmers because it's just, well, I tried this and it didn't work, so don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, that may work over here. It's pretty vicious in those groups, as in, well, you shouldn't do it this way because of whatever.
Yeah.
And although they may be right, I don't feel like they have enough runway and enough experience to say,
Yeah.
this is what I did. This time it worked. This time it worked a little better. This time it didn't work at all. This time it really made the difference. And having that longevity to go, here's the tweaks.
Yep.
Or to be able to go, I live south of you. I live north of you. I live in the plains. I live in wherever. The success I had and why I did, here's some things to think about in your region.
Yeah.
And you get that with more seasoned growers.
Yep. I think it's that is probably the most undervalued and underlooked area. I think is just the perspective of, one, making sure the context is right for you. Like when you're taking input, these signals or whatever, recommendations from other people that are doing what you're doing, but you've got to have multiple. You should have people that are local. You should have people that are, extremely successful that you either strive to be or at least can take some examples from them. But you need to have multiple avenues and all those people in between and different areas. And
I think scale comes a big part into that, because there's a hell of a difference between growing 1 versus 10 versus a couple of hundred tomato plants. The scale in which you go about your business day to day on 200 plants is vastly different.
Yeah.
So you can have somebody that takes care of 10 and come and eat your lunch about how you're taking care of your tomatoes, because they have the time to take care of 10.
Yeah,
so that's
right.
Listen to everybody, pick and choose what it is, but I wouldn't let that discourage
that's right.
whatever's going on. We talked about Kit a couple of times. Kit owns the bakery here in Paris, Texas, and it's much beyond a bakery. Kit is a culinary master. He came into town. I'm not even going to speculate because I'm terrible with dates, but I want to say about 12 to 15 years ago.
That's right.
I remember a fundamental shift in which he changed the way Paris viewed food, viewed eating. Another mutual friend of ours, we laughed that Kit runs his business how he wants to run it. He's going to make X amount of things. He's going to do it his way. There's no substitutes. That if you don't like it, you figure it's where the highway when you go in, but it works so well that he has developed this rabid fan base. You said that he was your first chef. I know he's come out to the farm. What's that relationship? How did it start? What's it looked like over the last couple of years, and where are you guys at now?
Yep. I will say he's a food magician, though. I mean,
so good.
I don't eat butternut squash, and he bought some of our butternut squash this fall, and there were these little tiny things, and it's like got this kale on top of butternut squash, and I like kale, and honestly, it's probably my favorite dish I've ever had in my life, and I don't know why, but there was just something he can do. He can turn nothing into something, and it's amazing. The
balance that he is able to achieve is second to none, and I've eaten at some crazy places, man. But I mean, to have that here, in not only no matter where you're at, to have something like that locally that you can appreciate, but to especially have it here, honest to God, it's my saving grace. A lot of months and a lot of weeks, because it's just, especially during COVID when we couldn't go anywhere and couldn't experience anything. There was that.
Yeah, at least you had that. And, it's really unique. So, but so I think it was our first fall. So this is 2020. Would have been the fall of 2020. We had planted. This was my first time planting radishes. Anything in the fall, rather, or actually. So, and we had a bunch of leftovers, and we brought it up to the bakery, and all the chefs just came out. It's like what every market gardener wants to see is just this, bunch of foodies standing over your produce, and I got pretty excited. I mean, I shouldn't have been excited for $2-3 bundles of radishes, but did the old fist pump in the bathroom, and I was pretty stoked just because that there was actually, somebody was actually entertaining the idea of buying our produce.
Well, we need that validation that early on.
Yeah, it was a huge affirmation, and so ever since then, though, it's just been every week. We check in and say, hey, this is what we got. What do you want? And so. And that's led into even another restaurant too that we now do that for, and so it's exciting to see that. But Kit is our what we call our kind of our flagship restaurant, at least for that. And so, and he provides that feedback. That's one thing that I really and mindful and grateful for is to be able, because I don't know what I'm doing still. A lot of, we're still breaking new ground, literally and figuratively. And to be able to have that sounding board, somebody who's flexible, I'm like, hey man, is that all right if these romaines have rust on them? He's like, for me, I don't care. Somebody else might, be very concerned that you've got rust on them. But it's like, so I contemplate, do I take off the rust leaves or let them just take that whole head and carve off what they want? Because then they can at least use the stuff that's not rusty, and to be able to have that feedback, and I'll even ask him like, hey, just the other day I said, how are you storing your kale? Because I can't get my kale to, the shelf life, no matter in the walk-in cooler or anything. He's like, you actually got to treat it like a flower. You put it in water, and
right,
and so it's cool to have that. And I don't know how many market gardeners have restaurants where they can actually get that direct feedback, especially for young people like me who've never really been in this space before.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I know both of us are stupid busy, but to be able to sit down for the last 4 hours with you and just talk about stuff, get to know you a little better. Now, with everything that we talked about, a lot of stuff is fresh on your mind at this point. And I told you I was going to ask you this. Your ultimate goal for your farm as of right now.
Yeah.
But if you could look into the next 5 years and say, if we're sitting down 5 years from now, where would that be? Yeah. And I don't like to do the what's your 5-year plan type of thing, but with all this stuff, the considerations and fresh on your mind, the growth that you had, where would you like to be?
Yeah. So fully operational. And what I mean by that is I'm 100% a farmer. Right now I'm still split. And so I'm hoping that's even next year or two, maybe if things keep going the way we're going. So that would be the one thing, is just like it's fully sustainable. It's carrying all the workers. It's carrying its own debt, or carrying its own weight rather, and is fully staffed. That would be, that's the bare minimum. The bigger vision, though, is that this is a community place. Like we've always, from day one, we've wanted, customers to come out. We want a little farm store. We want people to come out with their families. There's just so much missing. We're only 100 miles from Dallas, and so we want to get the Dallas family. Like I literally picture this kid sitting in his condo or his apartment with mom and dad, and he's never picked up a chicken egg before. I want them to come out to our little cottage, spend the weekend there, and to, go out, pick the eggs, and go out and pick berries and a strawberry or something, maybe make their own lunch, and to provide that experience. Also, just even in a larger community, like people just come out and have a pick for like the peach orchard that we're putting in this year, and for our berry patches and things. And so we want this to be a place, something that we can add to the community. Like it literally, one, it's just beautiful for people to come out and just to meditate, look at God's creation, and just to connect, right? Because every day the world is beating them up. And when they can come out there and it's a little sanctuary effect, and they're just like, wow, even you come out there when you've got to shoot video sometimes, right? And it's like you're just been traveling, and all of a sudden you come out and you're shooting a video pruning. It's like all of a sudden you can just see your whole countenance just changes.
Dude, it was one of my favorite things of last year when I came out and did those tomatoes. So we spent 3 or 4 days out there getting back to something that was my favorite part about owning a farm, and then to be able to totally revamp it over there and teach it to Diane at the same time, plus shoot for it was just hours of just complete disconnect.
And it was right in the middle of July, the summer, right? It was hotter in Hades, but I could literally just saw your countenance from the moment you got there. You were so wound up from all your traveling, and then like the end of that day, you were sweating, but you were smiling. It was like you just entered a bit of nirvana.
I can sit. Well, I'll tell you this: there's going to be a lot of because we're also making a video out of this, and I'm going to be sitting in front of that desk right there for hours on end. Yeah. But just going out there and being able, and that's something I can see, right? It's going to be done, and we can go back and look at it and share it or whatever. But to get to the end of that row, and then over the next couple of days, finishing out the whole house, turning around, and then teaching Diana, it was something that you saw was complete. And then in the weeks to follow, seeing Diana keep it maintained and to do her own style, because my way's not the only way. Yeah. She came into her own, and it was very, very rewarding.
Yep. So that's all part of it. We want to share that experience with other people, maybe not, at that level of detail, but we do want to have workshops out there. We want to help other people to come in and, and have workshops to say, this is how you prune, this is how we grow, this is how we start our whole process, right? To promote people to grow their own food, and maybe even help other small market gardeners too. So that's part of the 5-year plan. So we want it to be a hub of sorts, and to find that balance where it's not an everyday thing, but, because we still have our life out there. We don't want, paparazzi there, so to speak, every day.
Right.
But we want it to be very family oriented, and we have a strong focus on family. Like, we just want them to come out and these kids just to get on fire. I mean, there's no kid that I've never met. That sounds like a double negative, but you're right. What kid does not want to go out and pick an egg, right? I mean, when our cousins and nieces and nephew come over, they're just, first thing they do, they don't even give us a hug. They run out to the chicken box to see if they can find an egg. It's like, how rewarding is that? And then the next morning to fry it, and so that is really, I think, our heart in all of this.
I thought it was interesting that you started with reaching back out to Dallas to give somebody what you've been able to give to your kids. And this has been a recurring theme over this session about the lessons you've been able to teach. And then to be able to continue to teach that at that point would be a very scalable thing. But I also want you to think about what that would do for Paris as a community itself. 5 years from now, I remember when I first moved out to Texas, there's a town called Greenville, and then there's Dallas, and there was nothing in between. And now it's a full almost city between the two, linked up with a bunch of little cities. And with that urban sprawl continuing, it's just going to get worse and worse. To be able to bring income into the community, because when they come out to see you, they're also going to visit the town. That's going to be nice. Yeah. But then to also flip it around and put in a super long-term crop like a peach orchard, which you're beginning from scratch on that. And there's a lot of lessons you'll learn over those years. And to also want to give back to Paris as a U-Pick, it's infeasible to come to Dallas for a U-Pick. Yeah. So to be able to service two types of clients in vastly different ways, and to be able to grow the economy for our town, plus give the experience and the quality locally, all while selling to Kit, going to the farmers markets. It sounds like a lot to do. There's a lot to deconstruct from those goals. But given the time frame and how fast you've moved up till this point, it's totally doable.
Yeah, it seems like it is. Every day it's more and more in reach. And, the support of family and friends and just our customers, it keeps encouraging us to do it, And at first I thought it was a facade, or a mirage, if you will, but it's really tangible, And I think what we are doing, and I say we collectively as a market garden community, everyone around the nation, maybe even world, it's changing farming. It's changing the way people view food. It's encouraging people to go start a little hobby farm or garden or do something wherever you're at, whether you're in an apartment or if you have a quarter-acre lot in the suburbs, to do something. And so I think this is really the future of agriculture.